Hey everyone! Today, I want to share an inspiring and profound story about someone who faced the freezing grip of death on a mountaintop. It was a near-death experience that completely transformed how they view the meaning of life. Let's dive into this extraordinary tale and embrace the powerful message it holds. Ethan Carter, a young mountaineer with an unyielding spirit of adventure, had spent most of his life conquering the highest and most challenging peaks in the world. At just 28 years old, he had embarked on journeys that many could only dream of, trekking across blistering deserts under the unforgiving sun, braving violent storms in the Himalayas, and witnessing sunrises from summits that towered above the clouds. He had seen the awe-inspiring beauty of nature, where absolute silence often made him feel the profound insignificance of humanity in the face of the vast universe. Yet, despite achieving feats that garnered worldwide admiration, Ethan carried an inexplicable emptiness within him. He often wondered, why do I still feel like this? Am I missing something far more important than just climbing these heights? It wasn't fame, nor was it accomplishments. It seemed as though a voice from deep within his soul was calling out, urging him to seek something greater, a purpose, a true meaning of life that he had yet to discover. At times, in moments of solitude amidst icy mountain ranges, Ethan questioned whether he was running away from something or chasing after it. One chilly autumn day, as the weak sunlight filtered through the golden leaves surrounding his small cabin in Colorado, Ethan Carter sat alone by the fireplace, sipping his coffee. The cold air outside contrasted with the warmth inside, but a strange sense of loneliness was slowly rising within him. Suddenly, a knock echoed at the door. Ethan stood up, opened the door, and found a letter neatly placed on the doorstep, with no indication of who had delivered it. What was unusual was that the envelope had no return address, only elegant, formal handwriting that made him feel an odd sense of mystery. He picked up the letter, feeling a sudden, strange anticipation. Opening it, the contents read, "Oh explorer, there is a mountain not drawn on any map, where all your questions will be answered. But only those willing to risk everything can set foot upon it. If you are brave enough, go to the Soul Peak." The letter was unsigned, with no further information about the sender, leaving an indescribable sense of enigma. Ethan sat down, his gaze fixed on the words, echoing in his mind. The notion of discovering answers to the questions he had long pondered, at a place unknown to anyone and uncharted on any map, stirred something deep within him. Was this the opportunity he had been waiting for his entire life? Ethan sat alone in his room, the light from the desk lamp casting a glow on the letter in his hands. At first, he couldn't believe what he was reading. The letter had arrived so suddenly, without warning, and was so strange that it made him feel like something was off. As an adventurer who had been through dozens of grueling and challenging expeditions, he had encountered his fair share of unexpected situations. But this letter was different. Every word, every sentence in it seemed to challenge his logic. Although he was always cautious when making decisions, this time, the strange feeling wouldn't go away. He tried to convince himself that it was just a prank, a misunderstanding, but the eerie sensation lingered, following him everywhere. He shook his head and rubbed his forehead, trying to calm the confusion in his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, something in those lines continued to haunt him. Every time he read it again, he felt a powerful, irresistible pull, drawing him closer to the destination the letter was pointing to. The words seemed to whisper, calling his name, stirring a vague yet intense yearning in his heart. He couldn't explain why, but there was an unconscious feeling that this was the journey he had always been searching for, a quest not only to challenge himself but also to seek something greater. On those long, sleepless nights, Ethan couldn't shake the thoughts of the letter. He kept going back to the words, each time feeling like he was being pulled into a whirlpool of emotions and reason. His close friends and family, the ones who always worried about him, had advised him to give it up. They said that this adventure would only bring unnecessary danger, that he had already achieved so much in life and didn't need to go seeking more pointless challenges. But each time he heard their concerns, his determination grew stronger. His life had become too familiar with easy victories and the stability he had gained from his work, family, and friends. Yet deep down, he felt an emptiness, as if there was something yet to be discovered. He didn't want to just live from day to day, He didn't want his life to be nothing more than a series of safe, predictable events. He wanted more. He wanted his life to have meaning, and that could only be achieved if he dared to step outside his comfort zone. And so, one day, when the doubts in his heart no longer held enough power to stop him, Ethan decided not to hesitate any longer. He began preparing for the risky journey, this time not just physically, but mentally as well. He knew he had to prepare thoroughly for this trip, not only with the necessary climbing gear but also with a strong, unwavering mind to face the challenges he couldn't yet foresee. He gathered all the specialized climbing equipment he knew would help him overcome any obstacle: ropes, stakes, rescue gear, food, and the compass he always carried on every trip, even though it wasn't essential, but it always gave him a sense of security to have it nearby. But there was one thing he couldn't go without: a small notebook. He decided to bring this notebook not only to document his journey but also to write down his thoughts, feelings, discoveries, and possibly the answers he hoped to find. He didn't know that this trip wouldn't just be a physical challenge, it would turn into a spiritual adventure, one he couldn't have prepared for. And it would change him forever, in ways he couldn't even imagine. After days of navigating treacherous paths, Ethan could feel his body drained of energy. Every step on the rugged, narrow roads winding through the towering mountain ranges was a challenge in itself, but he never lost heart. The sharp, biting winds and sudden downpours only made each day more difficult, but his resolve remained unshaken. Ethan knew that his destination was close at hand, and all that was left for him to do was conquer the final obstacles. Finally, after a long and exhausting journey, as the last light of the sunset peeked over the mountain ridges, Ethan stood still, his eyes widening as he beheld a magnificent and awe-inspiring sight before him. Before him stood the Soul Peak, a place that had long been a legend. The towering mountain stretched skyward like an eternal flame, covered in a blanket of snow as pure and vast as a giant's quilt. The sloping face of the mountain looked like a wild, untouched painting, cold and distant, yet oddly mysterious. The winds howled from the summit, as though warning that only those brave enough to face its challenges could conquer it. But to Ethan, this only fueled his determination even further. The map offered no directions, no signs marking the path to the summit. There was no trace to guide his way. All that remained was the vast and imposing wilderness of nature. Ethan stood there, staring at the Soul Peak, feeling an intense urge stirring within him. He understood that this was not a journey that could be charted with a map or guided by the advice of others. To conquer this mountain, he would have to find his own path. He would need to listen to himself and the world around him, trust his instincts, and make decisions based on his own judgment. Every step would be a challenge, but Ethan knew that only by overcoming himself could he grasp the answers he so desperately sought. As Ethan climbed higher up the Soul summit, an unsettling chill began to settle in around him. Despite his thorough preparations for the journey, just as he thought he had conquered the initial challenges, the weather shifted with a violent fury. A fierce snowstorm descended upon him, sweeping through everything in an instant, as if nature itself had been triggered into a fit of rage. The visibility was reduced to mere feet, the world around him drowned in a blanket of blinding white. The wind howled like a wild animal, its gusts battering Ethan relentlessly, making it difficult to keep his balance. The bitter cold cut through his gear like a blade, freezing his skin to the bone. Each breath became more labored as the freezing air began to coat his jacket and goggles, reducing his visibility even further and making his movements feel sluggish. The weight of the cold was overwhelming, and he felt as though the very air he was breathing was hostile. With each gust, the storm seemed to grow more vicious, and Ethan found himself struggling against an invisible force. His only source of light, the weak beam from his headlamp, flickered in the swirling snow, offering no comfort against the fury of the storm. He could see nothing but the relentless white of the blizzard, the world reduced to a desolate void. But even as the storm threatened to overwhelm him, Ethan pressed on. The only option left was to hold onto a massive boulder protruding from the cliffside, gripping it with all his strength to prevent himself from being swept away by the storm. He lowered his head, focusing all his energy on maintaining his grip, refusing to let fear overtake him. The silence of the world around him was shattered only by the howling wind and the crunch of snow beneath his boots. In that moment, Ethan realized that if he didn't remain resilient, if he didn't overcome his own fears, this storm could very well be the end of his journey. Each step Ethan took in the blizzard was not only a physical struggle but also a battle against his own limits. His legs grew heavier with every movement, and with each step, he felt as though he was fighting nature itself. The cold was unbearable, biting through his clothing and numbing his bones, while the icy wind howled around him like a ferocious beast. Snow fell relentlessly, covering the ground, making it feel as though the very earth wanted to swallow him whole. His vision blurred by the thickening snow, Ethan had no choice but to push forward. Step by grueling step his strength was slowly draining, his body weakening, and every movement seemed to require an immense effort. His fingers, stiff with cold, could no longer grip the climbing rope, but he clung desperately to the boulder ahead of him. In the final moments before he could no longer keep going, his breath shallow and labored, Ethan glanced up at the overcast sky. The heavy grey clouds seemed to press down on him, and the snow continued to fall, as if it would never end. The coldness of the air was all-encompassing, and the silence around him felt absolute, broken only by the howling wind and the soft sound of snowflakes hitting the ground. With every breath harder than the last, Ethan's strength left him. His mind, still foggy, struggled to process his thoughts. He managed to look up one last time and thought quietly to himself, "Is this the end for me?" The weight of the storm, combined with his exhaustion, took its toll. His legs buckled, and he collapsed into the snow, the cold embrace of the white world swallowing him whole. Before he could think any more, his consciousness faded, and he lost himself in the darkness, his body lying motionless in the thick, cold snow. When Ethan slowly opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the absolute silence surrounding him, a stark contrast to the chaos of the blizzard he had just experienced. Unlike the bone-chilling cold and skin-piercing wind from before, now he felt an odd warmth emanating from the space around him. Soft light seemed to radiate from every direction, covering the surroundings and creating an ethereal and dreamlike atmosphere. Far off in the distance, a range of sharp mountain peaks stretched endlessly under the pale sky, devoid of any human presence or signs of life. Everything here appeared still, yet possessed a mysterious energy, like a world outside the grasp of humanity, where time seemed to have come to a halt. The air here was entirely different from anything he had ever felt. Though standing atop a high peak surrounded by snowy expanses, the atmosphere was light and refreshing. Instead of the biting cold, a gentle mist-like breeze surrounded his body, making him feel strangely comforted. It wasn't cold, nor was it warm, it was an unusual blend of both, creating a sensation of tranquility he had never known. Everything around him was utterly still, no sounds, no disturbances, like time itself had frozen. For a moment, Ethan felt like time had stopped, and he was left to fully absorb this peaceful quiet. From a distance, he could hear faint whispers, as if they were echoing from a distant place, but so close that he could almost feel them. Though he couldn't understand the words, the sound felt strangely powerful, as if guiding him toward an unknown destination. Ethan turned his head, but there was nothing to see except the towering mountains, the thick layers of white snow, and the hazy sky that resembled a painted canvas. The space around him was unlike any place he had ever explored. Everything was unfamiliar, yet there was an uncanny sense of familiarity, as if he had known this place for a long time. He couldn't explain why, but there was a strange pull here, a magnetic force that made him unable to tear his gaze away from the scenery. Even though he didn't understand why he was here, a part of him knew this place held some kind of unexplainable attraction, urging him to continue deeper into its mystery. Suddenly, from the stillness that surrounded him, ethereal figures began to materialize, drifting silently through the air. These weren't human beings, they were spirits, their forms faint and translucent, bathed in a soft, diffused glow. They emerged from the mist, moving with an eerie grace, their presence altering the very atmosphere around Ethan. Each spirit emitted a dim light, not bright but compelling in its own right, as if trying to communicate something profound, yet shrouded in mystery. One of the spirits approached Ethan, its movement gentle like a breeze. It introduced itself as the Mountain Keeper. This spirit, tall and clad in ancient garments, appeared to have come from an era long forgotten, one that Ethan couldn't quite place. The Mountain Keeper's eyes were filled with a strange, sorrowful glow, as though it had endured countless years of suffering and loss. The voice that came from the spirit was soft but resonated with clarity, as though it spoke directly to Ethan's soul. This is the resting place of those who could not complete their lives, the souls of those who never found peace in the material world. They are the ones who missed their chance to truly live, who could not follow their dreams, or who wandered through life without ever knowing where their journey was leading them. The words of the mountain keeper echoed in Ethan's mind, filling him with a strange fear, as if he were standing on the threshold of a truth he was not yet ready to face. The spirits around him, though silent, seemed to convey through their gazes an understanding of life and departure in a way Ethan had never imagined. Ethan could feel the arduousness and depth of the space around him. Each spirit seemed to carry its own story, each one bearing unresolved regrets. He began conversing with each of them, absorbing the haunting yet profound words they shared, as if every sentence was a fragment of a past filled with sorrow and missed chances. A spirit told the story of a journey once undertaken by an explorer, a man who was passionate about discovering distant lands, but ultimately gave up halfway when confronted with a fear too great to overcome. He admitted that he had stood at the peaks, but turned away because of his own fear. "I was afraid I wouldn't be able to return," he said, his voice sad, "afraid I would never see my family again. Afraid I would leave this world without completing the promises I made." Another spirit, an artist, shared how he had once dreamed of creating the most beautiful paintings but had abandoned that dream under the pressure of family expectations. He confessed that, throughout his life, he had always tried to please others, neglecting his own desires and passions. "I spent my whole life trying to make them happy," he said regretfully. "But in the end, I lost myself. I never had the chance to live for me." Each of these stories, whether filled with sorrow or pain, left a deep impact on Ethan. He began to realize that, throughout his own life's journey, he had focused so much on conquering physical peaks that he had forgotten to pursue the emotional and spiritual heights. The fears, sacrifices, and unfulfilled dreams had caused him to overlook the true values of life. And now, in the presence of these spirits, he understood that every step, every decision, wasn't just a victory or a failure, but a crucial part of his journey toward discovering truth and reconciling with himself. An old, weathered spirit, once a mountaineer like Ethan, slowly approached him. The spirit's skin was wrinkled, and his eyes held the weight of countless experiences. He wore a tattered outfit, as though it had braved many harsh, frozen lands, reminiscent of the legendary climbers Ethan had heard about. His voice was soft but filled with authority, as if each word carried the weight of a lifetime. "Ethan," he began, "you are no ordinary mountaineer. You have been chosen to carry the message of these spirits back to the world." Ethan looked at the spirit in disbelief. "Carry a message?" he asked, confused. "Of these spirits?" The old spirit nodded, his eyes deep with ancient wisdom. "Yes. We, these wandering souls, lived lives that were unfulfilled. We cannot change the past, but you can. You have the power to share our stories with the world, to prevent the mistakes we made, to ensure that dreams are not forgotten." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what to make of the responsibility the spirit had just given him. But before he could ask more, the old spirit continued. "However, before you can do that, you must find the eternal flame, an extraordinary source of energy hidden at the highest peak of this mystical land. The flame only reveals itself to those who are truly worthy, to those who have overcome their fears and the trials of their own soul." Ethan felt another shiver, not out of fear, but from the gravity of what the spirit had said. "The eternal flame," he repeated, a sense of unease growing in his chest. "What must I do to find it?" The old spirit smiled, but the smile held no trace of joy. "You can only find the flame when you dare to face your greatest fears. When you accept yourself and are willing to cross the boundary between life and departure. That is your challenge, and you must overcome it on your own." Ethan, after receiving the guidance from the ancient spirit, felt a surge of determination rise within him. Despite knowing full well that the journey ahead would be perilous, he made the decision to continue on. Dangerous roads and obstacles lay in wait, but nothing could make him hesitate. The dark, dense forests, where towering trees seemed to block out the sunlight, were the first challenge he encountered. Every step on the rugged dirt path, beneath the howling wind, felt as though the darkness was swallowing him whole. Yet, his resolve remained unshaken. Next came the precarious rope bridges, worn down by time, suspended high above deep, yawning chasms. Each step Ethan took on these bridges seemed to make them sway even more, but he persevered, refusing to stop. The fear and anxiety crept in now and then, but he suppressed them, determined not to let them cloud his mind. When he finally crossed the last bridge, it felt as though he had conquered a great challenge, not just of body, but of spirit. But the obstacles didn't end there. Strange, mythical creatures, with glowing red eyes, occasionally appeared along his path. They seemed like monsters from the stories he'd heard, but instead of running away, Ethan stood firm. He confronted them, his mind focused only on one thing: he had to press on. With every challenge he overcame, no matter how big or small, Ethan felt his mental strength grow, as if he were being forged with every passing moment. The fears began to fade, replaced by a deep trust in himself. Ethan realized that this journey was not just about conquering the elements, but also about overcoming the battle within himself. Finally, after a long journey full of hardships and trials, Ethan reached the place where the eternal flame burned brightly, casting a golden, radiant light in the mysterious space around it. The flame was unlike any he had ever seen before. It did not emit heat like regular flames. Instead, it radiated a warm, gentle, and magical glow, creating an atmosphere where the surrounding space seemed to come to a standstill. Time seemed to slip into a suspended state, and all sounds and movements faded into the background before the peaceful power of the flame. But as Ethan stepped closer, he realized that to activate the eternal flame, he needed more than just physical endurance and strength to overcome the challenges of the path he had traveled. He had to confront the deepest fears within himself, the emotions he had long buried and tried to avoid. At that moment, painful memories from his past flooded back. The feeling of loneliness, the countless nights spent in the quiet house in Colorado, where he often felt abandoned in a world where no one truly understood him. The moments when he wondered if he was chasing an impossible dream, whether his pursuits were nothing but fantasies, suddenly came rushing back into his mind. These emotions were overwhelming, like a heavy stone pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. His heart raced, cold sweat broke out, and confusion set in, making him lose his sense of direction. It seemed as if he no longer had the strength to take another step. But then, in that moment of pain and disarray, a powerful realization emerged within him. He understood that the loneliness he was feeling was not an end but a part of his journey. The fears he was facing were not obstacles to escape from but challenges to embrace. Loneliness was not a loss, it was an opportunity for him to look within, to confront limits he had never dared to explore before. It was in that loneliness that he found the true strength to continue. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the quiet stillness around him. He stood there, facing his greatest fear, and gradually accepted it. The loneliness, the helplessness, and the fear, all these emotions slowly faded, replaced by a new, powerful source of energy. The eternal flame seemed to respond to this change within him, and the light from the flame grew even brighter, intensifying and filling the space with radiant energy, as if confirming that he had overcome the greatest challenge of his life. At that moment, as Ethan began to feel he had overcome his fear and started to reconnect with his inner strength, a young spirit appeared before him. The girl, with sad eyes and a pale face, seemed like a wisp of mist drifting through the air. She introduced herself as Lila Harper, a soul that had yet to depart because she still carried the regrets of her past life. Ethan felt an unusual connection to her, as though the two shared a deep bond that didn't need words. Lila began to share her story, and her words echoed in the stillness of the space, like whispers from a distant place. She had been a young girl with big dreams, hoping to become a writer, but the fear of failure held her back from pursuing that dream. She was afraid that her work would never be recognized, that her efforts would amount to nothing but failure. That fear grew stronger over time, taking hold of her self-esteem and confidence, until she made the decision to give up on everything and lead a mundane life. Her story resonated deeply with Ethan, reminding him of the doubts, fears of failure, and moments of feeling lost he had experienced in his own life. But what moved him the most was the deep regret Lila carried, the realization that she had missed the chance to live her life true to herself. "If I could go back," she whispered, "I wouldn't be afraid of failure anymore. I would live for my dreams." Lila's eyes lit up strangely as she continued, as though she was sharing an essential part of herself. "Live, Ethan," she said. "Do the things you're afraid of, because only when you face your fears will you truly live." Her words were like a beacon of light in Ethan's heart. From deep within, he felt a renewed sense of belief. Lila, with her regrets, had given him a priceless gift, a reminder that life is not about avoiding failure, but about confronting it and moving forward. With this newfound understanding, Ethan turned back toward the eternal flame. He placed his hand on the base of the flame, and for a brief moment, he felt an overwhelming surge of strength rising from deep within himself. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the light from the eternal flame blazed brighter than ever, illuminating the space around him, as if all the souls of those who had once faltered were sending the flame didn't shine simply because of his strength, but because of the courage he had regained through the bravery of those who had found their release. Ethan slowly opened his eyes as he felt the weak light from the sky filtering through the clouds. Around him was a thick blanket of snow, untouched, still and serene. His lips were cracked, his limbs numb, but his heart beat strongly, full of life. The distant sounds of voices from the rescue team began to pierce through the cold air, but gradually growing louder and clearer. Their calls were like waves crashing, awakening him from his long, deep slumber. The rescue team had found him, miraculously, in a condition nearly beyond exhaustion, but still alive. He could hardly believe that he had survived everything that he had been through. His body was drained of energy, but the strength and faith he had found in the spirits on the mountaintop, especially the light of the eternal flame, had kept him alive. The rescuers rushed to get him into the ambulance, and within moments, he was safely taken to a medical facility where doctors quickly attended to his wounds and checked his health. Having recovered somewhat, Ethan felt a profound change within himself. It was as if he had crossed a threshold, not just between life and loss, but into a new life altogether. The emotions and thoughts he had experienced throughout his journey made him realize that life is not merely about existing, but about discovering its true meaning, a meaning that transcends fear, pain, and failure. Back in the normal course of life, Ethan decided to share his story. He began to write about his journey, recounting every detail, every emotion, and the lessons he had learned from the souls who helped him. His stories became a source of inspiration to many, motivating those who were lost in their own lives, seeking meaning during tough moments. Not stopping at writing, Ethan also began to give speeches, sharing his experiences with groups of people in need of encouragement. He visited schools, community organizations, and even hosted online talks to tell the story of his life-changing journey. His words were filled with passion and inspiration, igniting a spark in everyone who heard them. Every story he shared carried a deep message about overcoming fear, living authentically, and having the courage to face challenges. Gradually, Ethan became a spiritual guide to many. Thousands of people found light in their own lives through his words and stories. Each time he saw the smiles and bright eyes of those he had helped, Ethan was reminded of the unforgettable journey he had taken on that mountaintop, where he discovered his true inner strength. Lila Harper, though only a spirit in the fantastical world Ethan encountered on the mountaintop, lived on in his memory as a vivid, ever-present figure. Her image, with bright, sparkling eyes and a soft yet determined smile, would often flash in Ethan's mind whenever he recalled his journey. She wasn't just a spirit, but a companion, someone who had stood by him in his weakest moments. She not only offered him guidance but also shared her own story of mistakes, of regrets in life when she had given up on her dreams out of fear of failure. Her stories became a flame in his soul, teaching him that fear is something we can overcome, and only by facing it can we truly find our strength. Lila was not just a friend but a teacher, an immense source of encouragement during the darkest times in his life. She helped him realize that although life is full of challenges and pain, it is how we confront them that truly matters. Lila wasn't physically present, but she was always with him in his thoughts and heart. Every major decision in Ethan's life, he thought of her words, and they became the driving force that helped him endure every hardship. Every time Ethan thought of her, he felt a deep connection, a bond that could never be broken, even as time passed. Lila had changed him, and though she was just a spirit, Her influence remained with him in every step of his life. He didn't just carry her memory, he carried the values she had imparted to him as he continued his journey in life. And even though Lila no longer lived in this world, she would forever be an inseparable part of Ethan's life, a flame that would never die. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope Ethan's journey and near-death experience on the mountaintop have inspired you and given you deep insights into life. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more exciting content in the future. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.